overall, we're seeing right now a huge evolution in standards, in needs, in usability, and in incentives that is rising to the point where we're finally getting near that critical mass. And yes, it's been 20 years, but we're getting near that critical mass where we're gonna, I think, see the model as that. So at the end of the conversation, I looked at the architects and engineers and I said, you guys just aren't incentivized the way everyone else is. As a contractor, I have incentives from ease of use to money to all these things. And as an architect and engineer, you're just looking downstream and saying, I have a ton of risk that I'm not getting paid for, and I have a ton of expectations that I'm not always able to meet. How do we incentivize the people at the beginning of the process to do a higher level of model that then will incentivize everyone downstream? How do we tell those cowboys, hey, you're leaving a lot of money on the table, because we had a people chime in saying, listen, you're leaving tons of money on the table, you're absorbing tons of extra risk. You know, how do we get those incentives aligned? What we're going to talk about is bringing the model to the job site, but also sharing the model. So like I have the construction, I'm on the construction end of it. So I'm at the far end of the model spectrum. And what I'm going to try to do as we go through is I'm going to be taking notes furiously, because my goal at the end of this is to actually kind of sort things out so that we have some places to start. We're going to be talking to Ryan, Nichole, and DJ. And they're going to bring perspectives from design, construction, and from the technology end. I know DJ also has some construction opinions that he's going to bring to the table. But what I'd like it to kind of focus on is the barriers and the roadblocks to bringing models and using the model versus drawings. Okay, and when I say drawings, I mean normal paper and e-paper. Okay, so PDFs, those count as drawings. That's not using the model. So we're going to look at barriers and whether they're internal, external, roadblocks, whether they're internal, external. And I'm going to go a step further than that. And when you guys are talking, what I'm taking notes on is I'm taking notes on the different levels of model that we're talking about and who is the key sector that's talking. Because I've talked about getting people into the model a lot. And what I notice is the reason depends on the sector. If you're in the architectural sector, your reason's different than an engineer's. If you're in the AE sector, your reason's different than the contractor. And I also have seen owners object to the model in that there are submittals and submissions that they want made that are paper in their, are typically done in paper. I'm gonna go ahead and just hand it over to our presenters to introduce themselves first. And then we're going to start with Ryan after that by talking and sort of get his feel on why we're not using the model in terms of his deliverable as an architect. So your deliverable as an architect obviously is different than the construction, but Ryan and Nichole and DJ, why don't you introduce yourselves first and then we'll start with Ryan.
Okay, well, great. That was a great introduction, Jonathan. So thanks for that. And thanks for having me. For today. So hi, everyone. My name's Ryan. I'm the digital practice leader for CMBA Architects in Des Moines. My intro is just look me up on LinkedIn. You'll know everything about me. So let's just cut to the chase here real quick. Once again, thanks, everyone.
My name is DJ Phipps. I'm a senior strategic product consultant at Procore. Prior to that was in the construction tech and VDC space. And happy to be here. See a lot of familiar faces. So looking forward to the conversation.
Hi, my name's Nichole. I work with Big D. I'm the Construction Technology Implementation and Adoption Manager.
Right on, right on. Thanks, Nichole and DJ and Ryan for doing this. And Ryan, I'd like to put you on the spot first. I know that we've talked about this just a little bit, but what do you see as the major reason that we're not delivering models? And could we start out also by saying, like, when you deliver a model downstream, if you deliver a model downstream, about what level of design are you seeing, are you doing typically? If you'd hand it over to that, the contractor, I guess, in your case, as an architect.
Absolutely. Let's start to unpack.
Yeah.
Tough. Yeah, it's a tough conversation, but we actually just completed this conversation in a little CMBA group gathering we call our learning zone, and we discovered that we can give the model to anybody over the web using like an Enscape tool. And the first kind of reaction was, "Whoa, are we liable for this?" And I think you're going to start to see that as we move forward. We always have, is the first reaction from architects is, "Whoa, I'm not done. I'm not ready. What if they see something I didn't model correctly and they price it wrong?" I think from the design standpoint, we need to get over that. And then we need to engage better. I think to answer your second question, if we can begin to engage better with the contractors and subs that are out there, I think you're going to see a lot more process improvement and adoption. As far as the LOD, this has been a long-standing conversation and journey for a lot of folks. A lot of the big firms are big believers in level development, 300, 350, 400, whatever it is. I have yet to really utilize that metric for the models that we use. That's not to say that we're not following any kind of standard. We kind of follow our own standards and say, what do we need to get, the building built? And that's kind of been our guiding principle. And we're in the 300 range most times for as far as the checklist goes. So, no, great question.
Hey, Nichole, can I kick it over to you to kind of be the counterpoint to what he just said? Now, I know that, so you guys know, we kind of have Nichole on here as the devil's advocate because they don't use a lot of models. But I know you have received some. So when you've received models, what level of development have you seen? And on the positive side, what have you thought the advantages are receiving that model, sort of to talk to Ryan's point?
Yeah, I mean, I think that for the most part, again, we're a huge GC, but we really have a minimal amount of deployment of BIM in general. But when we are receiving the model, we're taking it at face value and basically sending all of our MEP folks and even our staff into the wings to rebuild it. And I think that at the end of the day, there's benefits to that from a trade partner perspective, especially if they're doing prefab or cut list or anything in regards to prepping for the job or pricing for the job. But realistically, until the contracts actually identify that we are to build off of a model, we are still really leery of actually utilizing it as such a reference. Both in-house for pricing and for deployment in the field. Again, I think that we probably are a lagger in that regard, but to which level, I honestly, I feel like an asshole. I don't even know what you're even referring to and in terms of the LOD levels. So
Look, I think that's good too. So like, especially since there's like 30 people in the room. So level of design, I'm just going to hit on it just super quick. I went down to Pittsburgh when I was an engineer, and I go through this entire conversation about what we're showing in our models. And this guy starts throwing these numbers at me. And I'm like, I have no idea what you're talking about. And so basically they split it up by hundreds, and like 100 is just planning, 200 is like design development to sketch. To Ryan's point, their definition of it is so vague as to make it pretty hard to do. 300 is like contract documents, like you can bid it, off of these documents, and this is probably what you're used to seeing. 400 fabrication documents. So like 400, there's not supposed to be 450. But I hear it discussed all the time. Like I've even heard somebody say 475, and I was like, I have no idea what you're talking about. DJ's nodding his head. He's in the same boat as me. He's like, I don't know what you're saying.
I've heard 300 and 350. So. Yeah,
and the king of all, and this is the most misunderstood one, is 500. So 500 can be everything from like my last job when I was a contractor. We had to go back in with the scanner, scan everything. And if you're more than 2 inches off, you have to move it. And that's down to 3/4 inch conduit. And that was a nightmare. But that's what 500 can be. And then we had to add Kobe data to it, which is this other acronym that means we want to know all of this stuff in everybody's Excel sheet. We want all of that in our model. I don't know why. We'll probably never use it as facilities maintenance people, but we want all of that stuff in our model. And I bring that up, Nichole, because I think that's one of the blockages is there's not a common discussion of what real level of design is, but also people are asking for things that they do not need and that just make Ryan feel more liable. So I'm going to flip it over to DJ real quick here after that brief. And DJ, as somebody who's working at bringing that technology to market, what are people asking you from an information standpoint to bring them? Because you're sitting there with a viewer and everything else, and you're hearing feedback on that. What are people asking for when they talk about delivering a model? I'm going to say to the field for right now, just to make it easier to talk about.
Hey, DJ, can I interrupt a minute before you get started?
Go ahead, Alan.
Do you not think that the AIA and the BIM form define what the LOD specifications are pretty clearly? And I think the other misconception is you're calling these models. The elements in these models, not every one of them are at 100, 200, 300. It's not an entire model.
Correct.
That's why you have the model development specification where you determine what pieces are of what value. For example, with our clients, when we end construction, when they provide CDs, we're going to have elements in there at 300, 200, 100 based on what we want and what we need. And I think the AIA and the BIM forum specifications make a good effort in explaining that pretty clearly.
I would agree with you, Alan, but it's a lot of information to consume. When we delivered our BIM execution plans at the beginning, we were clear because you're right. You nailed it right on the head. There's a misunderstanding when you talk about level of development. They think it's the entire model that has to be, but it's actually a mixed bag of different levels of development in the models. When you kind of explain that and then break it out, people have a better understanding of it all. But it's a lot to consume on the front end and kind of dictate all that stuff. But as for to circle back to Jonathan's initial point, yeah, the focus has been to try to bridge that gap between the office and the field and try not to have, VDC be such a siloed process. We went from getting BIM boxes out on the site to having people access the models to iPads, and so there's multiple offerings out there nowadays that definitely make this process a lot easier to access the model in the field. But then again, it's how much development's been in the model. Is everything in there? Sometimes there's an expectation that everything gets modeled when it really isn't, or there just hasn't been the time to do so. So I definitely think we're at a real critical point in the industry where access to the model is a hell of a lot easier than it used to be even just a year or two ago.
I'd like to shoot back to Alan's question because I think it deserves like a second look too. So the AI and the BIM forum, as they were developing the level of design, one of the big questions that I found out when I was like sort of doing the initial was, I said, it seems like when we stick to the under 300 level items, everything's fine. And it's when we try to reach to 400 and 500 where there seems to be a disconnect between the descriptions that I see from AI and BIM and where we end up. Would you say that's accurate, Alan, or do you still feel they have a good handle on that?
I think, yes. I mean, with all of those type things, yes, I think there's some discrepancies and things that we have to review. But I mean, to get on this call and to say that there's nothing out there or we don't know, that's kind of crazy, because that is a good document and it's developing. And they did have the foresight to automatically throw out 500 because it doesn't make sense, because if you look at this, they're in progression and 500 is in progression, but an owner doesn't need a 500 level model for a lot of what they're going to do. So I think they have put a lot of foresight into that document. It's just continuing to be developed, and it's going to continue to need to be developed.
Right on. Do you think that and I'm going to shoot it over to Ryan. Do you think that has the ability, that level of design, to provide that liability freedom that we're looking for? I mean, are we going to, because at the end of the day, that's part of the reason it's there, is to sort of define liability.
I would make a counter argument to that and say that's not, to the best of my knowledge, it's not really its first intent. Its first intent is to kind of standardize across the industry what my 300 is and your 300 is, and make them all the same. As far as how it gets built, I mean, that's a totally different story. So let me give you a good example here. We don't necessarily follow the LOD checklist before or during a project. Every single time after we get done with the project, I basically open up the checklist. And as Alan said, it's very well organized. I'm not going to argue that. I look at the checklist and I look at what we've done, and I basically hit all the check boxes, and I never open the document. So I mean, it's very thorough. But I'm not going to sit there and like nitpick and get into the grains of sand on it. Now, if there is a special action that's called, and we're starting to see more technologies out there, Allied BIM, that will take the model and take it to like a Tiger Stop type of application and get it ready for fabrication. Absolutely, that stuff's coming, ladies and gentlemen, and I am excited about that. I'm excited about that LOD 400, even though I have very little to do with it at that point. So that's the thing I want everybody to look forward to, is getting to that 400 level, that fabrication level, and yeah, moving forward. I love it.
Sal, can I pick on you? What's your thought? And why I'm sticking on LOD, just so you guys know, is I'm trying to find some good way to balance out what I'm seeing in the models with what's being delivered to the field. When you receive a model, do you, in your contracts and in your mind, start applying the LOD to it, or you just look at it and sort of not use that as a standard?
Not for the engineer's documents, but for the subcontractor's documents, yes. So we expect the subcontractor to draft to a level that is constructible. We don't expect that. Well, we expect the walls and ceilings to be have constructible data from the architect, but not necessarily the mechanical trades and so on. But as far as the mechanical contractors, yes, that should have all the data in it to make that model and build that model.
Yeah. And that's where I do think that's where the liability comes in, is when you hand over a model to somebody else and we want to take it to a Tiger Stop, or want to take it to a Razor Gauge, or trying to think of who else makes them. There's two other people that make them. We could do that, but it would be wrong, right? All of the stuff that we have in there needs to be updated in order to support that. So outside of level of design, and liability, what are some of the reasons, what are some of the other reasons that you see, Ryan, that we're not delivering at least the engineering and architectural models down through as contract ready versus, making PDFs?
Can I interrupt for 1 second?
Interrupt away.
Yeah.
Interrupt.
Yeah,
Please interrupt everybody.
And I could pick on Rob and a couple other folks on the call here.
Please
and I'd
do.
probably even say within the last couple months, there's a document that typically design teams will have you sign that basically holds them at no liability. We're giving you the model as a courtesy, but you're supposed to follow the drawings. And so that's where that comes into play, and it's totally understandable. I mean, as we talked about, even touched upon, that could be a whole other discussion on the contracts and the limitations that exist there. Here's the drawings, we're going to give you the model, but the model is just it's your responsibility to validate the model versus the drawings to make sure it's actually going to help you in coordination.
I'd like to suggest an alternate framing of this.
Go for it.
So setting aside liability for a moment, and I'll circle back to it. I think we spend a lot of time on prescriptive things and thinking about the push. And the framing I would like to suggest is kind of like the pull. If we're using the models in the field, why would we use the models in the field? And I'll use the example of rebar. You know, if you look at a rebar drawing, a 2D drawing is a coded set of language. I can look at a rebar drawing, I can understand the size of rebar I need, I can understand the spacing, and I can understand the dimensions very quickly from looking at that 2D sheet. I don't care what your level of detail is on your rebar model. I can't consume that information and easily install rebar. So if we think about like actually what we would need to do to make models consumable in the field, we need to think about why they are useful in the field. What do models do for us? They allow us to understand how different scopes basically interact with each other or may need to be sequenced.
Mm-hmm.
And which are the subcontractors that actually truly latch onto that? They're the subcontractors whose bottom line is increased through prefabrication. Because they use the model, they make more money. And so irregardless of liability, they're going to use the model because it helps them save on labor hours and decrease their bottom lines. Right, that now we have that with MEP. I think if we want the tipping point of how do you make the model more useful than the drawings, you essentially get the structural trades and the framing trades to use the model. And then you have the tipping point where the majority of the work is more efficiently built off the model. And forget about the GC. The GC will come along. The trades are self-incentivized to do that. And so I think that's a really interesting question to home in on is like, how is this information consumed? And how do we make this beneficial to the sub's bottom line?
I think that's a great point, Laurie. And I have always kind of used the example of the model is the representation of the completion of everything being put in that space, like you talked about, right? And so the benefit of it is trades, you know, and boots on the ground, putting that work in place, can actually see the entire space. You know, a lot of us go through this exercise of trying to fit 15 or 20 pounds in a 5-pound bag. And so the model may be coordinated, but what also has to happen after that is there has to be a sequence of work that has to go into place. So sometimes, you know, electricians got to get in to drop rods for conduit racks that are below ductwork, things like that. Sal brought this up in the podcast last week is, you know, if somebody just gets in there ahead of everybody else and runs a 3/4 inch conduit right in the middle of the corridor before he has to hang this massive piece of ductwork,
Or a concrete wall out of place.
Or something, right? The benefit is that, you know, we take the 2D drawings, make a model, go back to 2D drawing, go to model, and then go to 2D drawings and deliver those to the field. And a lot of the boots on the ground, when they're looking at the drawings, they're looking at their single scope of work. They're looking at their duct drawings. This is what they have to install. The model gives them a complete picture of what else is going on around them, so they can start having those discussions of actually sequencing the work that's been already coordinated.
Could someone that's not in construction maybe address what Laurie just said too? Because I think one of the things that she pointed out that was wonderful is the reason that I'm interested in this is because it's now a pain in the butt as a contractor, because so much is prefab, so much is automated. And I was an MEP that just did plumbing, and we were drawing ductwork and electrical, because even if I did that, I still made more money. I made more money doing everybody's coordination for them than coordination not happening. So from the standpoint of people that aren't contractors or that are in the structural or other trades, what are some areas where the model is making you money? What is the argument that says we don't want to have to create more drawings? Because from a plumber standpoint, you walk into like a biodiesel plant, for me to make that into individual pages is a nightmare. And what I can give you in a model easily is so much. It's just, I reached a threshold of information that can't be expressed on paper very easily. So from an architect standpoint, anyone in the room, and please interrupt whenever you want, who feels that as an architect or as an engineer, they really have incentive to stay in the model versus delivering these drawings?
I'll leave it open for everybody before I jump in.
I'll say, my name's Kevin. I'm an architect up in Seattle, and we do work all over the West Coast, mostly private developer work, some hospitality. And so we're in a bit of a different scope where we've got some projects that are, you know, if they're large enough, they're wholly into using BIM and, you know, getting into the model. But we've got a pretty big chunk of our work that is not quite that big. It's mid-rise, it's, you know, mid-scale, smaller contractors. And I use the model a lot on just for general orientation. The GC, I'd love to get the inspectors and, you know, people coming in who are asking for all this documentation and papering up every single change and everything in there. If I could just show you this view and show you how this works, then you'd save me gobs and gobs of time. So in that review capacity, I would love to be able to, you know, cut through a model and, you know, show the GC so that they can communicate to the subs, you know, actually this stuff needs to fit here, and they need to do their job and, you know, help coordinate when the sequencing and who goes in where. Because a lot of the times when I go down to a job site, it's, you know, 6 different subs walking around with me, and they're all asking me, well, what do I do here? What do I do here? What do I do here? And, you know, that's not my place to say. That's, you know, that's really where the subcontractor coordination, the GC, really drive that piece of it. But the model part of it, we'd love to be in more during construction. There's some contractual things, there's some liability things, but really it comes down to the paperwork that's required by, you know, all the processes driven by contracts and jurisdiction. That's really what keeps us in the 2D environment a lot. So we'd love to be more, but I think until we get some more of the approvals and review pieces interacting with models more, then we're still stuck in that 2D world for a lot of our, you know, our piece of it.
That's a great point. Has anybody ever worked with an authority having jurisdiction that said models were okay? Like actually had a submittable that was a model? I tried it in New York City, Sal, and it didn't go over well with the fire.
We did a central utility plant. My last company, we did a central utility plant. And when they realized that it was going to take 3 weeks to get shop drawings on paper, they broke down and let us submit the model as the design, as the shop drawing. And needless to say, it saved 3 weeks and it eliminated a lot of questions. How many times do you submit a shop drawing and the engineer is trying to read through those lines and says, well, you missed this, but what he can't see is what's below the pipe, because there's only so many layers you could make on a 2D drawing, right? Mm-hmm. So you could keep adding drawings. Drawings take time, they take time to review. The answers are in the model. The thing that you always have to say to anybody that wants to go back to the paper is ask that piece of paper a question and wait for the answer and see if you get an answer. Because anything inside that model, you can ask it a question and get the answer that you're looking for. You can't do that with a piece of paper. You'd have to call somebody that's looking at the model and think about how counterproductive that is.
So I practice
looked at European workflows much. There are 2 fundamental differences that I see that I would not claim to be an expert. One is the design build model is much more prevalent there, and I would say much more ingrained in terms of, like, we do design build here a lot, but we still do a ton of submittals, which to me, like, tells me we're not really doing design build. You know, so the design build model there is much more ingrained, and contractors, contracts where the contractor is really working directly for the owner. And the second thing is that the regulatory environment is different, and it does shift from country to country, but it's much less of the prescriptive inspector coming out every week and checking every wall. It is more along the lines of this is my understanding of the final inspections where you're checking for whatever the equivalent is of ADA compliance. And what that has done is that has completely shifted the incentives. So you no longer have the liability questions of models. And also the contractor is more responsible for, like, the total quality of the output. And so I think that's a really interesting counterpoint to dive into as we understand why models are not being used on the job sites in the US. Let's look to the place where models are being used and how are they being used.
And we do have some people that Do we have anyone that's in the European market that's on the call? No, I guess we don't. Just looking through everybody. The only thing I would say to that was kind of weird is when I was doing work with people that are overseas, they make really cool models and they do use them for a lot of stuff. But when you dig in, like if you're a contractor at a 400 level model, you're like, did you just make a pretty picture for most of your model? Because it looks like you did. So also making it a requirement has also like had this little offshoot of people that are just making models that look pretty. Which I thought was weird because I totally agree with you with the rest of everything you said. But when I saw a couple of their models, I was like, that's not buildable, which was odd. There was somebody that was about to talk right before Laurie did. Do you still want to chime in?
Yeah, that was me. I was just going to talk about the authority having jurisdiction point that you were making. And you also asked, do I make money off the BIM model? Or something like that.
Yeah.
And my point to that was I don't make a dime off of BIM, and I probably never will. I didn't go to school to develop BIM something. I went to school for design, and so I will put as an architect. I'm going to put my architect hat on. I will do whatever it takes to get the design, the life experience for the people that are going to be using this building. I will do whatever it takes to make sure that design happens. Now, I want to have a good model too, don't get me wrong. I want to be able to share that. So in order for that to happen, now it's shift to the authority having jurisdiction. Have you ever just called up code official of your state or who's reviewing, just have a conversation with them and say, instead of just shoving, uploading whatever plans and 2D drawings, black and whites to them, have a conversation, bring them over, share screen. You got Zoom technology, just share the screen, walk through it. We do this on almost every single project that's of consequence, 10 million and above. And we just walk through the building and they get a chance to look around. Oh, that's 2-story space. Oh, you're going to have trouble here. You can't have this. So much more comes out than waiting till the permit set is getting ready. And it is such a huge relief. Now that I can maybe claim saves me money from BIM or something like that, right? But I'm not interested in necessarily making money off the BIM. That's not my goal in life. Now, NFTs, we can sidebar into blockchain, and we can talk about how we might be able to NFT that. I don't want to derail that conversation, but that is coming, and I will make sure that happens. But yeah, so to answer your question, just have a conversation with the AHJ and make sure they understand the building as well as you do, and you'll have less problems.
And I have done that. With the New York guys, we actually flopped a HoloLens on them and went ahead and let them see it in augmented because we were building on an existing biodiesel plant. And I did get good responsiveness. What I also got though in the back end was I got a lot of, we can't do this for every job. And I think that's what you said too, with the larger jobs, it can be problematic. I do think that as you move forward though, if they get used to doing that, that will be the way they go. Just real
Jonathan,
quick.
They also say they couldn't do inspections virtually, and they're doing inspections virtually today.
Yeah. Isn't that nice?
Amazing how that works.
That goes to the consistent theme here, right? Is that I don't know about the rest of you on the call, but me saving my company money doesn't actually make me any money. Maybe it shows up in my bonus at the end of the year. I get to stay employed or whatever. And I hear that theme over and over again in BIM is like, or technology or whatever is like making money. Most of what you guys have talked about is just making the person's life easier. It's really got nothing to do, like a building inspector does not, he went into being a building inspector, not because he cares about making money. He went into it. Maybe I should suspend my theories on why he went into it, but making money was not his goal. So going to him and saying, hey, look, you're going to save the county, $4 million a year by doing virtual plan review. Like, who cares? But when you go and say, hey, I made your life easier, right? You guys have hit on half a dozen places for this already. Like, why don't we use 3D models of rebar shops? Because paper drawings are easier for the guy installing the rebar. Why is the inspector now suddenly willing to do virtual inspections? Because he's scared. He doesn't want to get sick. Suddenly he's willing to do virtual inspections.
Isn't that fundamentally what we're talking about in this whole process, is making our business more efficient?
but you got to get down to the individual. That's something that, like,
Right,
I've been in the
but
business
that's-
over 20 years, and,
Right, but
and
we have to-
everybody talks about making money, helping the industry. At the end of the day, what people care about is, like, have you improved their life? You got to start there. So I've listened to BIM guys complain for close to 15 years about why nobody adopts the model. It's because you put it in a little tiny box and you walk around with this view that only you have, and you look at it in your hand, and then you throw a clash report at them, or you throw something else at them. And the guy goes, well, what the hell is this, right? What is this secret thing you're keeping in your box? BIM guys are like medieval priests hiding the information because they're only ones that read Latin. Like, you know, it's like, it's insane. And now we finally have these tools to just give the model to people and see how they use it. Like, what's the benefit to you? You know, like, we put the model in Procore, the team looks at it, and suddenly my QC guy is like model madman, right? Couldn't spell BIM 3 weeks ago or 3 months ago. And now he's like, all he wants is the model. I had no idea that he was going to do that, but I had to make it available to him to make his job easier. So now he likes it. So now he's a raving fan.
But can we pivot on that a little bit there, Rob? Because Nichole, I'm going to steal a little bit of your thunder here, but bring up a really valid point. Is the industry is still very prevalent, and I'm borrowing Nicole's term here, cowboy construction. There are still a lot of companies who do not leverage any sort of BIM coordination modeling efforts. They just go off the 2D drawings and they build buildings all day long, regardless. You know, like Rob, you guys do a lot of multifamily type of stuff. You know, Nicole's company, they do complex projects, and they do it all without BIM. It's that is what's really, I think, holding things back, because they're still able to successfully build projects and make money with or without BIM.
Yeah,
And DJ,
we listened
what
to
I-
music on 8-track for a long time too. Music sounded the same, but there's just a better way of doing it.
Agreed, but
the
until
interesting-
you show them the opposite of that, and if they're continuing to still make money and not change their processes.
Well, I think
well,
it's
I think the key here is the
at what point they're making money. I mean, it's at what margins they're making that money.
Right.
I mean, I've been a general contractor for 30 years, and it's questionable at what point that they're making money, at what percentage point. I mean, I know,
Yeah.
you know, the margins at 1%, 2% that the GCs are making money, and even the larger engineering companies, you know, especially the different cost pools between the industries and the verticals within the industries. I think that one of the big issues across the different verticals within the business is, how do we make the business more efficient?
And if I can jump in here, I want to
Yeah.
add some perspective for thought on these 2 points exactly. I think there's a big difference between risk in the industry and perception of risk in the industry. And we have this sort of well-developed idea of what risk is and how we manage risk. And I'll use kind of a typical CM model is we manage risk through through contracting, right? We buy out our risk with our subs. Is a traditional contracting model.
Yep.
The interesting thing about technology is it provides us new ways to de-risk our projects. However, as construction companies, we have to shed old understanding of how we model risk and how we manage risk on jobs. And that's where I think we get the break point. Like, yeah, sure, we can build buildings without BIM all day. We're just using our old risk model. What does technology allow us to do? It allows us to de-risk projects in different ways. So we can either build more efficiently, we can open up new business lines, we can do different things, but construction by its nature is not a risk-friendly industry. So
Absolutely not. It's not risk friendly, because what you're doing is you're passing that risk down the chain to the lowest denominator and the weakest link in the process, and typically the ones that can't burden the risk. And so it's easy for, especially in the A&E field, to pass that risk chain down to the sub-trade denominator that's not going to be able to shoulder that risk. And
But
so, you know, and that risk factor is ultimately doesn't play out. It's not a sustaining process. The turnover rate in that part of the business it's not sustaining. It doesn't have that temperature, especially in the turn of our market. What we have to do is be better stewards of our market. If you look at the collaboration rate, our industry, we do 54%. We complete about 54% of the tasks that we say we're going to do is what we actually complete as an industry. That's what we actually.
Any clients on the call? Any owners?
Yeah. I mean, if I were an owner, that would be a piss. That's like, you know, every time we say we're going to do something, we only produce half of what we say we're going to do. Any other industry, that's just ridiculous. And why do we allow that to happen? That's built-in inefficiency. That's from the architects, the engineers, the contractors, the supply chain, everybody. We as an industry.
I would also extend that to the owners, though. Like if you take like the sort of pure economic actors, like take like a Tishman Speyer, not to pick on them in particular, but like they have a particular model of how they finance projects, how they, the contract structures that they allow, and how they execute on projects. So I'm not saying it's not contractors' fault. I'm just saying this, like, we work on existing models with existing perceptions of risk and how we contract, and shifting that. I know we're getting away from BIM, but like shifting that and shifting how technology allows us to do that is going to be critical to, I think, you know, either changing business models, increasing profit margins.
I would agree, but I think that that's one of the tools that helps us be more efficient. That helps us with the creation of collaboration, accountability, keeping us on task to be more responsive to each other, and creating that accountability in the process. To your point earlier, Laurie, I think you hit it right on the head in terms of just that process of sequencing trade, sequencing the process of understanding, taking something out of a 2D model and keeping things, understanding the relationship between the trades and the trade flow. I don't know how many people on this call are familiar with lean construction and you know, just the relationship between the trades and actually the process of work and workflow. You know, lean construction, looking at tasks and how the interdependency of trade flow impacts each other, but also sequencing trade flow is so critically important, because one trade obviously impacts another. But I think there's a huge impact to the process. And from a design perspective, that's equally as important to the building process, just like it is in the application.
And when you look at the sequencing and the tasks and the fact that people don't do 4D scheduling, even people that have a good model don't 4D schedule. Like I'm always shocked when I sit down with the beautiful $1 million model and I'm like, so where's the 4D schedule? And they're like, no, we don't do that. You know, we don't sequence the work at all. We leave that up to the guys that are just kind of randomly out there doing their own thing. And it devolves into first up is best dressed really quickly.
I wanted structure has no idea what mechanical and electrical are doing. I mean, how's that impact with design? It's going to have a huge impact to design.
Yeah. And I think when you said that we don't produce, and you guys are right, Nichole, and I saw Nichole like almost losing her mind. A lot of that is the owners kind of drop out halfway through, and we stop getting work, or we stop working. I do think though, you know, when you have a model that's showing you at a granular level, at a better or more accurate granular level, what you're to build, you're more likely to be successful. Like it's just all of those projects. And to the point of Cowboy, I had one thing and then I'll hand it to Nichole because I would like to go back to the cowboying projects because I think that's important. I've noticed, at least in Erie, the second you have one person doing BIM and making sort of leading jobs by doing BIM, it kind of infects everybody else, and it certainly infects the ownership. I mean, I was working on refineries where at some point they're just like, if you don't have a model and don't have a scanner, don't even bid. You know, you're not bidding our jobs, because when we use this technology, we hit our schedules, we do what we need to do, we get the job done. So I feel like BIM works against the cowboys only when there's enough people doing it right. That cowboy profit margin can't hold up to it anymore. You know, whether or the way that the owners see it doesn't work out anymore.
I mean, I completely agree. I think that, you know, a reflection of, you know, access and the ability to source the model in the field. You know, I had a case where an owner showed up and we just had the design model accessible to him. And it was the best BD tool I could have ever used because, he was just walking around, a slab trying to place walls, or like actually seeing current conditions with the accelerometer. Yeah. But the irony there is that he opted to use full blown and actually invest the 100K that was required on the next project because he wanted to see more of that. So bringing people to the yard to actually kind of collaborate on making the investment, because a lot of it, again, as Daniel said, like there is a cost with everything. And unfortunately, in some cases, the cowboys, which as you can tell, my company is one of them, really does not want to shoulder that cost. So we're pushing that cost to the owners and allowing them to kind of sit there and waffle on if there's a benefit. I also think that, the GC side, we're not doing a really good job of actually upselling the benefit of not having work in place issues or clashes that are field collaboration issues. And we're not actually monetizing what those changes actually create and what havoc they cause in the field. Because if we were all being honest about cowboy construction, there's a reason why we have, schedules push, we have budgets increase, and a lot of that could have been alleviated if we were doing good BIM modeling in the first place.
Well, owners think they're already paying for that. We go and do our presentation, we do our song and dance, and we get our grinder out and our monkey dances around in his cute little suit, and we go, we're the experts. What are you building again? Yeah, we're the experts in that. We're really good at it. No questions asked, no delays, no change orders, so on and so forth. So we sell that. And then the owner comes back and goes, wait a minute, I thought you knew what you were doing. Like, what do you mean that you need me to pay for you to coordinate the job? I thought I bought a coordinated design. And then I thought you were going to work out the rest of the problems. Where'd those guys go? Where's your BD guy? That's why they always want to talk to the BD guy again 6 months in. Like, where'd that guy go? He told me something else. This isn't what I was promised.
I think that's where liability does come back to haunt us too, is I had an architect stand in front of an entire group of people say, I am presenting you with a clash-free model. And we're like, is there insulation on the pipe? He's like, no. I'm like, well, is electrical represented? No. Sprinkler? Nope. You don't have a clash-free model. You're presenting
coordinated
me
access. Yeah.
Yeah. There. And you know what? The worst part is, I think if architects and engineers are honest with the owners and say, we build this part of the design and the contractor does this part, I think that's fine. I think it's the honesty of where do we stop and where does the next person start that is causing a lot of the backlash and a lot of the worry about risk. Because I had an engineer that was correcting my drawing once on fabricated items. And he's like, well, I want this over here. I'm like, that's not how we build stuff. We build stuff differently than that. And the expectation that an engineer is going to come up with that level of detail isn't a great expectation to have from an engineer. That's unfair. They're not getting paid equivalent to that. But to what you said about the owner sort of thinking that they paid for it, I run into that almost every job. Almost every job, when they ask why we're doing a year of coordination after they paid for 3 years of architect coordination, it seems like that's a bit of messaging that we probably should change on top of what we're doing right now to try to
figure out a way to deliver on the promise, right? Like, I mean, do we change our story up front, or do we figure out a way to deliver on the promise?
One thing that I think is really interesting is like the question of how do we align incentives? So like in talking about, like listening to you guys talk about this process and this transition from design to construction, I always think about like contractors need money up front to really do the coordination or to engage early in technology and do the things to de-risk the project. However, owners don't want to pay until there's work in place, right? So you kind of got this crux where like the money's not flowing when you actually need the money to do the things with technology that actually de-risk the project. And so like what my mind goes to is like, how do we shift? Like if we could do something where you say like, okay, Mr. Owner, we're going to cut the contingency in half. We're going to have 50% of the original budgeted contingency, but you're going to release 25% of that contingency to me upfront, or like this is going to go to me guaranteed. And then like that starts putting skin in the game in terms of owner sees the upside savings at the end. The contractor's willing to decrease the contingency, which is reasonable if they're going to de-risk the project through BIM. And then the contractor actually has the money available at the beginning of the project to start working on it. So like, how do we start thinking about that, or like models that would shift that around? I don't know that that's the right answer, but like just playing with incentives. How do we align incentives around a constructible model and a constructible building?
It's a really good point, Laurie. I think a lot of us who've been on the GC side or even the trade side is we typically don't start coordination until we've actually signed some of the contracts or give notice to proceed to our trade partners. And then, you know, I've been part of those conversations that Rob has as well, is then they're like, okay, you have 3 weeks to coordinate the building. And you're like, that's not enough. That's not enough time. So I like that, where you could move, you know, BIM, you know, coordination is a pre-construction activity, but it does not typically take place in the typical pre-construction workflows. That's part of budgeting and some of the other things like that. But if you were able to actually, like take that chunk of money and move it forward in the process and start that process earlier, you know, it seems like on the coordination space, we were always chasing schedule. And then always get the phone call from the field. Where are you guys at? Are you done? Just tell me when you're done so I can start installing this stuff. When there's just, you just don't have the time. I think the time is probably the most important thing that gets forgotten about, and is what has really, I think, affected people's opinions of efficient coordination efforts. Is you just don't, the stuff takes time, and they just don't give you adequate time to do so.
So
What if
we had a phase? What if we had a phase of the project that was pre-coordination? So now you have an architect, you have a GC or a CM, and then you award to trades to only do the coordination. So now you're working out the issues that are inside the model, you're doing the coordination, and then when you get to the real coordination, where you assign a contractor to actually build the project, say 80% of that coordination is already done, because we all know coordination takes a long time, not necessarily for the coordination, but for the last phase of the design, right? So you get into a coordination process and now the stuff doesn't fit in the ceiling. That's not coordination, that's a design issue. So we wait for their approval to get the ceiling lowered, or we don't get the ceiling lowered and we start moving utilities to other rooms and other things like that. Or how many times do we figure out that carriers don't fit in walls? And now a bathroom has to change. And that takes a week out of the coordination. A coordination that has 10 weeks, that's a tenth of the coordination is gone right there. So what if we were to do that and then hand over a true coordinated model with the people that can make a coordinated model, and just award that phase that way? Because it's the opportunity loss. You talked before about, you know, everybody can build a project, they've made money. But like to what somebody's point was, what's the percentage that you made money? So you're happy, you're proud, you pump your chest out, you walk away, you made 5%, but you left 3% on the table. Because let's take the total station, for example. You're technically not building out of a model, but without the model, you don't have the total station or the data for it.
Yep.
No one can deny that a total station is going to lay out the work 3 times faster. So there is right there a savings.
Even if you did, you know, and I don't know, most of us who've done a lot of coordination, even if you just coordinated the big stuff, duct mains, hydronic mains, fire protection mains, some of that bigger stuff, that's what usually takes the most effort to kind of really do all the dance that happens. And that's what usually triggers ceilings lowered, things like that. If those bigger things were coordinated and then the smaller distribution stuff took place as part of a true coordination effort, yeah, you hit the ground running. That means if your duct mains and all that big stuff is already coordinated, that stuff can hit the shop and already go into fabrication and be ready to be installed.
Right, and Ryan just mentioned too, think about the prefabrication of modularization opportunities. Because what happens with a lot of the modularization, if you get to that coordination process, you don't have time in the coordination to make the components that are needed to make something modular. Or you don't have the time to actually build it offsite because they want to see men or women in the field installing, right? So I've always said, if you just want to see people in the field, then let's get a football out there and play a game. They're going to be more productive if they're just playing a game of 7-on-7 than if they are trying to build things.
I love what you're talking about, Sal, and that's really intrinsic and extrinsic motivators. I play the sport because I enjoy it, not because, and that's an intrinsic example, not because it's a company-wide health initiative Or an extrinsic one is I play the sport and participate because of the status of winning, the ego, the puff my chest out, or the award of it. So how do I know what's going to be a good incentive on a team that I've never worked with before and it's different on every project? I don't know that we have an answer for that today, but I want everybody to kind of think about that. How do I get my team thinking on that level? I might bid this project lower because I know these guys use prefab and I know their drawings are good because I worked with them on another project. Therefore, I'm going to lower my price. Just get to thinking about things like that and how you can leverage that. And then we can de-risk the project and, you know, all that fun stuff.
Yeah, and that goes back to what we were saying about, you know, they've always built a project this way and they've made money. They've made money on the jobs that they've got, bidding the job with that data from the past. But if they were to change that, build out of the model, use the total station, do the prefabrication, the modulation, and take the data from that, they would be getting more work because they would be able to keep their number down lower. Right now, they're competing against the same people that are building it the way they used to build it, and the numbers are still where they are. And what we see a lot of times, especially on the construction management side, is you're adding $300,000 for BIM coordination, but your labor hours are not decreasing. Well, how is that? Why are we doing that? The labor hours are not decreasing because you're getting through the coordination phase of a project, just the phase, and then you're taking that model and you're leaving it right on Windows. That's where it stays, right there, and you're building a piece of paper and you go back to 1990. Well, why would you be any more efficient other than maybe a few less classes in the field? Why would you be any more efficient in the field? You're not. Of course, your labor hours are going to be the same. So
why would I work for you?
Right.
Another component of it, though, is that you do allow yourself to have tighter margins if you're more predictable, even if you don't necessarily reduce your labor hours. So there's like a lag time where you adopt a procedure or a technology, and that technology allows you to bid more aggressively.
You have to have that confidence to know that you have that predictability, right? Like we talk a lot in construction about risk and you know, are we builders or are we risk managers? Are we builders or are we accountants that build, you know, like all these jokes that we tell, but risk we can manage. It's that uncertainty that we can't. And that's, I think, what prevents the adoption of a lot of technologies is that, like, for Sal and for DJ and me and Ryan and, you know, Daniel, and we all kind of have a sense of like how this stuff works, what the value is, what the potential incentives are. And a lot of people don't. And so for them, there's this huge uncertainty out there. So we look at it and go, why wouldn't you do this? You can totally like make more money or be faster or do more work or be better or go to more conferences or whatever. For us, it's obvious, but for a lot of people, it's not. And that uncertainty is way worse than risk. You know, it's, hey, you're telling me I'm going to get more work if I do this, but I don't know. Yeah, I'm only making 5%, but 5% is better than 0%. So I'm going to stick with the 5% I know, you know, and proceed in that kind of known and certain realm to get that predictability, right?
But let's face it, the true reason why we don't see a lot more of the model being utilized in the field is the inability to use the model in the field, right? It's the amount of people that are out there that wouldn't be able to access this Zoom meeting, no less utilize the model, that don't really know how to send an email. If you send them something via a Teams conversation or a Slack conversation, they think it's either a football team or a pair of pants, right? And the biggest issue with that is if you have a job at a produce stand and you don't know what a Granny Smith apple is, you better know what a Granny Smith apple is in a week. But for some reason in this field, you could get a job as a project manager for a mechanical contractor and not be able to open the model, and 3 years later still not be able to open the model, and nobody says a damn thing about it. You work for a mechanical contractor and 90% of your work is being shown in a model and you can't open the model. Take that same project manager, and if he said, I have no idea how to read a paper drawing, he would be gone in a minute or he would never get the job. But in 2021, the job is in the model, and the same guy has the ability to say, I don't use the model. Fired. That's your name. That's what it should
I think it's also kind of prevalent, and there's a lot of us on this call that definitely have a focus or an emphasis on, you know, like someone had brought it up earlier, like making the boots on the ground, making their lives easier by giving them this information. And I think in some companies, and even just some VDC managers, some tech people, they lose focus on why they're actually taking models to this level of detail. And it is to make jobs safer, more productive, more efficient, so that our people in the field putting the work in place can do it and go home safely, be more efficient, like feel good about the work they've done. But if, you know, we get one chance. That's the problem sometimes. You get one chance, and that one time that model doesn't show what's needed or it's not accurate, then the entire thing is garbage. And so that's one of those, like, that's a huge barrier that we still have to kind of continue to work past. But it takes getting out to the field, getting out of the office and talking to your people and educating them and showing them, like, yeah, you're right, Sal, like the models hasn't always been the easiest thing to get, but we're in a place where there are multiple companies who have made accessing the model so much easier than it used to be. But there's still this misnomer of like, it's this BIM stuff, I don't even want to touch it, you know, all the other things like that. Or even like Rob said, we're not even like giving some people the chance to even look at it because we're making that judgment on, oh, they just won't use it. Like he won't have any value of it. And so I think that's where it is more than anything, is showing them that you can't, here it is, go on your iPad, go on your phone, go to your office, whatever. Here's the model. This is giving you some information. It is a supplement to the drawings right now. Until we get to the state where the model gives us everything, they're still going off of drawings, but now they can use the drawings in collaboration with the model to get a better picture of what's going on in that space.
I would
Laurie,
add to that point, DJ, and let's use a specific example. The GC has responsibility here as well. How many times on your project have you seen something where a plumber is going in to put a waste line, there's a conflict with a concrete wall, you do all the review, and it turns out that concrete wall is an inch off? What is your response as the GC usually to that plumber?
You should have field verified first.
Well, that wall is,
but that's what it is,
off of where it's shown in the design. We say, hey, Mr. Plumber, it is your fault.
But you go into this is the whole, this is the real like dirty part of coordination, is there's a wonderful thing. Hold on. There's this wonderful thing called tolerances, right? Models are perfect, quote unquote, perfect in their deployment. Like if it's 15 foot on center for columns, it's what it is. But guess what? That column spacing could be 1411 and a half, could be 15.1. That's all within allowable construction tolerances, but then we are prefabricating elements to fit that perfect 15-foot dimension.
I want to piggyback on that for just a second, because I want to sort of reinforce.
You got 2 minutes.
I got 2 minutes. Okay, so as a plumber, that constantly happened to me. I literally had building validation as part of our workflow. So I made so much on prefab that I bought a new Faro scanner for $80,000, and I scanned every time the steel went in. And if you had a steel in my way, I moved, because I could make enough money in prefab to pay for it. So I think at the end, the contractor side, profit is a great incentive. I agree with Rob that certainly, people being able to only build things once really helps their morale on the job site versus building 15 times. I know we kind of rotated around the subject a whole lot and kind of went everywhere. I did take notes, but I couldn't take notes as fast as y'all can talk. So I only got some. So I will organize those and pull them together into something. The last thing I would say is, if we do this again, I feel like maybe we should shift into that. What can the model do for you?
When you do it again. When
I do it again, we'll shift maybe over into what that model can do for you on the job site, the delivery methods, and like Laura says, what are the incentives that come from using a model that are going to do that pull? Why would I want to use a model even if I'm not asked? So. And I'll kind of hand it off to Nathan, right? I'm going to hand it to Nathan. No, he's just looking at me.
Hey,
I just randomly
sure
asked him to do that.
I'm waiting for this thing to run out. Oh, it's you got a minute and 15 seconds. You're good.
I got a minute and 15 seconds. Well,
hey, Jonathan, I was going to say one thing too. When we're talking about reading the model,
Yeah.
You know, a lot of times we have 3D and we think it's really great. You know, if we go back to thinking about it on the architectural side or even the construction side, and we're showing it to the owner, because they really don't understand plans for a certain degree.
Yeah.
Well, you know what? We are working with people in the field that understand plans. And that's what they've used. And we don't really have a good transition from that. I don't know if many of you remember back in the day when you could bring DWIFs into Navisworks and that you could see the floor plan. And then when you needed additional information, you clicked on it and it took you to the 3D. That's what 3D is for. 3D is to give you that additional information, that next step. So I still think there's reservations in saying that we just build off of the model and all that we should have is the model in the field. And I think that's where even to Procore, and I'll promote DJ's new tool, that's what's really good about Procore is now you can also see the 2D side, because that's going to give you information as well as the 3D side that you don't get in the other. So 2D is not going away. Drawings are not going away.
No, for sure. And I would say this, Revisto does the same thing. You hit the PDF, takes you straight to the model. And I think every model viewer is going to do that exactly because of what you said. I think if you're a model viewer that can't do that, you're not going to last very long. Because you're right.
Well, that's when we're going to actually be able to use models in the field more, because people are going to get more comfortable moving back and forth between the two. Right now, getting into a model is a pain in the ass. And if you don't have a 23-inch screen minimum, you don't know where you're at, and it complicates the process more than helping the process.
Dude, I have the perfect person to invite on the next time we have one of these. We had a dude that had no internal BIM. We gave him an iPad. We gave him a way to ingest the model, and he was the ductwork guy. We were plumbers. He ended up being the master of that job site. And I think he's like probably 55, 60 years old. Not that that's old, but it's older than me. And he was able to, during the course of that job, at the end of the job, I wanted to hire him.
Joe, you're in your COVID disguise. I just sat in a room with you and didn't even realize it was you.
Yeah. This is 12 months of no haircuts. That's what it looks like.
Do you have the full man bun? Are you able to rock it in Texas, or do they still give you crap down there?
Oh, it's outlawed down here, but I can pull it back. Yeah.
Well, at least you have hair.